Okay, welcome to the wonderful Zoomie session that we're about to have. I'm Vince Anthony. I'm General Secretary of UNIMA-USA. I want to welcome you all and remind you that we have activities all year long and they're all very exciting. So please, if you're not already a member, please consider joining UNIMA-USA. And now, here's your great Zoomie session.
Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Felicia Amato. I am an assistant professor at Boston University in the Department of Art Education, and I also run the Women in Masks project there. And I have the absolute pleasure tonight to present a conversation between two accomplished puppet and mask artists, Sandy Spieler, who is based in Minneapolis in the United States, and Alison Duddle, who is based in West Yorkshire in the UK. Before I more fully introduce our guests, though, I want to reiterate what Vince has said about supporting UNIMA-USA. It's an amazing organization that promotes the work of puppeteers and mask artists and all those who explore the slippage between these and other forms of material performance. I want to thank Kathy Foley for shepherding these Zoomies with great care and enthusiasm. I want to thank Sara Bermenko for her behind-the-scenes magic making with the tech and social media that allow these events to happen. I would also like to thank my assistant, Kate Bernstein from Boston University, for her work on promoting and helping with the event, and also with our Women in Masks website. Sara and Kate will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A tonight. And while you may freely add comments to the chat, please use the Q&A for questions to the artists. And ideally enter your questions throughout the event versus waiting until the end. That way we have them ready to go because we're on a strict 1-hour timeline tonight. Nevertheless, we will endeavor to respond to as many questions as we can. We'll also be sending out a post-Zoomie mailing with links and additional information. For example, tonight I will give a very abbreviated introduction to these two amazing artists, but you'll find a more robust bio for both of them on the Women in Masks website, including links to their own web pages and pedagogical resources connected to Sandy's teaching. As a native of Minnesota, I can't remember a time that I wasn't aware of Sandy's work and that of the company she founded and directed for decades in the Heart of the Beast Puppet and Mask Theater. I only came to know Alison's work in recent years. Scrolling through Facebook, I would come across her amazing creations, both gigantic and miniature, and her in-process shots of the myriad workshops she hosts in the UK and internationally. I'm sharing right now what to me is an image of one of the most touching moments I've seen in puppetry featuring one of Alison's puppets. Each world she creates is as marvelous as the next, and her work to nourish communities is an example of what the puppet arts, often crafted out of humble materials and processes, can offer the world, no matter where we are or in what conditions we find ourselves. And then I discovered that she and Sandy had a long friendship. Relationships and lineages within the puppetry community are important to acknowledge. They help us trace our history and honor the forms of apprenticeship, both formal and informal, that this work relies on. The cross-pollination and mutual admiration that sustains artists is exemplified by Sandy and Alison, as they will demonstrate tonight. We'll start with Sandy. I'm now sharing a photo of a 12-year-old me waiting for the May Day parade to start in 1979 in Minneapolis in my newlyweds mask that I made in a workshop with Sandy. Growing up in southwestern Minnesota, more than 3 hours from any city, I had the fortune of participating in an artist residency with In the Heart of the Beast in 6th grade. Sandy and other members came to rural Marshall, Minnesota, and after a week of paper macheing at the public library and rehearsing in the gym of the local Catholic school, we put on a water pageant, the theme song of which is still in my memory. For an awkward outsider kid, the warm buzz of creativity and affirmation of those workshops truly buoyed and sustained me. A few months later, we were encouraged to join in the annual May Day parade, and I remember walking masked, waving up at the residents, looking down from their duplex balconies on the tree-lined streets of the Powderhorn neighborhood in South Minneapolis, which was the home of the theater for many decades. With the acknowledgement of her significance to me, and for so many others, as a teacher and an artist, I present Sandy Spieler.
Okay. Thank you for that great introduction, Felice, and for inviting me to be here. And also thank you, the behind the scenes work of Kathy and Kate and Sarah. And I'm so, so, so happy to be able to share this hour with my very, very dear friend and true artistic partner, Alison Duddle. So I have some slides, which Sarah, maybe you could start. Yeah. Well, when I can find no other way to express the depth of yearning or grief or love or wonder, the world of puppet and mask theater allows me in to recognize layers of our interconnected world where we're able to enact dialogues and transformations with the human and the non-human world, or within the interior world of a human. That first slide that you saw, I performed that mask. It is a mask, and I stuck my tongue out of it with a seed, which I lifted out of my mouth and put in between these two little puppets, which started the corn to grow, which you'll see in these next slides here. Sarah's running the slides for me, so thank you, Sarah. Okay, yeah. I rarely work alone. I'm so fortunate to have had a community of people, and one of those was Alison. And so I had to include these masks here. They're in storage, but these are masks that Alison and I made together for one of the May Days. They're spirit birds. They were from a very sad story that we had for our May Day ceremony that year of the death of a girl who was shot by gang bullets. And you can do the next slide as well. These also traveled to Korea. There you can see what the masks look like when they're being actually worn. Alison and I worked on many, many things for May Day together. Just keep going with the pictures. Yeah, this is a mask we made together, and I can't even remember. I think maybe I made it and Alison painted it, or maybe she made it and I painted it. I'm not sure what. That's the nature of our collaboration. But we also made many, many things for May Day as she came to Minneapolis to work for many, many years. This is a small mask of the Tree of Life. And the next slide is the large mask of the Tree of Life, huge, huge puppet. I'm mostly interested in bringing forward aspects of the world most unheeded. Sometimes there's a lot of grief. You can keep going with them, with the slides, or we won't get through them. Sometimes they rise up in protests. Keep going. Yeah. Thank you. Such as when Winona LaDuke called and said, "Where are you? I need you to be here for the Line 3 protest up here in northern Minnesota against the powers that were, putting the oil pipelines through the Mississippi River." And even though it was 2020, yeah, keep going, these deer. Keep going. Even though it was 2020 and we were in COVID isolation, I sent the word out, and pretty soon there were 12 people working in their own homes to build these deer, which we then brought up to stand on the front line and to stand silently and staunchly at the Mississippi River. It's true that when you're inside a mask, you yourself change. We have to let our egos go, and you swoon into what that is of the mask itself. To wear a mask, I believe, is one of the greatest lessons of compassion. You begin to understand the world from a different interior space as soon as you enter the mask. What is being born of the mask? Maybe you need to be a 5-year-old girl, maybe a soldier, maybe a wolf, a crow, or even an earthworm. Always the breath leads. And to train our postures, our gait, always paying attention to where the eyes of the mask are looking, especially if the mask is oversized, like that one of fear and the previous one of greed, or worn on the top of one's head. Where is the eyes of the mask? And these are puppets that are now in an exhibit. These ones here I made with a team of Indigenous youth from a theater, Ikitawan. I do lots and lots of workshops in my home community. And we worked with clay. Next slide. Which is my favorite way of working. And yet, unfortunately, in recent years, I haven't been able to work so much with clay. And so okay, keep going. So I find boxes, cardboard boxes out in the fields, out in the alleys, and figure out how to transform them into the puppets in a way that is easy for other people to make as well, so that multiples of them can be made. These are all people from workshops where we've made lots and lots and lots of masks to bring out into the streets. Okay. I'm always seeking the ways to sink into the pulse of the moment. In the place where I live, which is a very diverse urban neighborhood, and because I work so much with paper, I'm always thanking the trees. The last May Day parade, we planted 1,035 trees as a thank you to our tree ancestors who are now in the paper of these masks. And what you've seen here is from the miraculous and very essential story of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And before that is the biblical nativity story, which is very important on the streets of our home community, a bilingual Spanish-English community with strong Indigenous roots. So listening into the pulse of what is happening and taking the traditional stories and bringing them freshly new is one of the things that often happens. I continue to work with the water, even though it's kind of funny that Felice was probably there for one of the very first workshops I ever did, but I continue to work with the water, doing processions, protests, prayers, and installations about the water, so important for the interconnection of all life. My process really is about divining, about listening deeply to pick up the pulse and sometimes to bring it to the surface, and also to behold the divine nature of all things. These last pictures here are from a place that's in the backyard of my house, the Puppet Nest. So if you come to Minneapolis, please come and visit. Okay, thank you. I am now
Sandy, you have more time if you had a few more things you wanted to add. You have time if you'd like to talk some more. I know it's impossible to gauge the sense of time when you're speaking to a crowd, especially on Zoom, but we can also return to you.
Well, I mean, I think what's the challenge of what this particular presentation was about was masks. And a lot of my work is actually big communal rituals or performances, large, very large puppets, processions on the streets, big protests, things that rise up out of the community. And so to try to find actual images of just a few masks was not so easy. So I wanted to talk more about why do I work? I don't work to make a pretty mask or to have a decorative piece. I work because a mask or a puppet can speak in a way much, much, much deeper than I could ever speak, or that I feel human dialogue can speak. And so I think, if you're interested, go to my website, because there's a lot of photos on my website and you'll have a better sense. And really, then contact me. I'd be so happy. And I get to work with so many wonderful puppet artists, like the Twin Cities is just bursting with puppet artists now. And then there's Alison Duddle, who worked for a while with us. Maybe she learned how to make puppets in the Heart of the Beast, but she has taken it so much further, and it's so wonderful. And it's my great, great, great honor to introduce Alison Duddle.
Hello. Sandy, that was so amazing. What an absolutely beautiful and whirlwind journey through some images of your work, and more than that, just that the deep thinking that you do, the inspiration that you bring to the work that you make. Really, I had actually made some puppets before I connected within the Heart of the Beast. I'd made different kinds of things, but it was a moment of seeing a show that made me know that that's what I wanted to do. I knew that what I wanted to do with my life was to learn how to make people feel the way that that show made me feel, and to be able to connect with people, as you say, in a way that is beyond words, that's through images and thought and collective inspiration. Yeah, I'm gonna share some slides with you. If I can work out how to do this, hold on just a moment. I'm gonna press the share button. Then I have to do this clever thing. And then I'm going to go right back to the beginning. Okay.
And if you can, a minute ago the slide was really large, and then now we're seeing more of the slideshow itself versus each individual.
Okay, I will. That's because I'm not doing a slideshow. There you
Perfect.
go.
Perfect.
Technology is not my strong suit. Thank you, Felice. This is a picture of me, and it's a picture of me and my daughter Flora, and a mask that I was making, and it's in one of the first May Days that I worked with Sandy, and so it's an important picture to share with you. It was just a massively important part of it has been and continues to be a massively important part of my life and my art making, and that relationship with Sandy, that is a personal relationship, but also a very deep artistic connection, has informed, I think, almost everything that I've done. I would say that I wrote just a little bit about why I admire Sandy's work. I'm just going to say it at the beginning here, because otherwise I'll not find the right moment to say it. But I think for me, Sandy's ability to capture the essence of an idea in sculptural form with simplest of lines and gestures, and using the absolute simplest of materials. Moving beyond realism, she operates on a level of poetic imagery, creating a space where the viewer connects with their imagination and with their heart wide open. That's kind of, for me, what I feel when I am part of seeing Sandy's work. Okay, I'm going to flick through some of my slides here. I've put this one in. after I moved from Minneapolis back to the UK, which is where I'm from originally, I was fortunate enough to come across a company called Horse and Bamboo, directed by Bob Frith. And they were a company that worked almost exclusively with masks, with a very distinctive form of mask. It's almost like a way of creating painting in 3D form. And I got connected with that company, and I worked with them and increasingly as a joint artistic director over 17 years. So it was a very large part of my artistic working life. And this is a performance that we made in, I think, 2002, but I might be wrong. And it was a story about the painter Charlotte Salomon. And we created it as a touring piece. And we toured it in the UK for a few years. And then we were fortunate enough to bring it to Minneapolis and to perform it and at In the Heart of the Beast with performers from the Minneapolis area. And we worked in collaboration with the Holocaust Center at the University of Minnesota. And it was just a really lovely full circle way of starting within the Heart of the Beast and learning so much at Sandy's side and through the clay and paper mache, and then bringing a performance that I'd made in the UK to that puppet theatre, which was so important to me. So my first few slides are pictures from shows that I made In the Heart of the Beast. I won't tell you about each of the performances, but maybe you might have questions about them later. And this slide is actually a performance that I've made more recently. It was called The Bone Sparrow, and it was based on a novel by Zaina Freyon, and it was about the plight of Rohingya refugees living in Australia. So I'm just flicking through. These are pictures just of masks in different forms that I've made over the years and for different occasions, some for theatre, some for outdoor events. These were made for a film a couple of years ago, The Electrical Life of Louis Wain. And for me, there's not a huge distinction between performing with mask and performing with puppets. Both kind of invite us to do some of the same things. They encourage us to be an active participant in the relationship between the performance and the viewer. It encourages the audience to pay attention, to fill in all kinds of gaps, the gaps between what they see and what they imagine the character is thinking and feeling, to fill in the gaps between what they believe, between what they see and what they know the movement represents or what the sculpture represents. In fact, I think the more gaps there are for the audience to fill in sometimes, the more they're invested in caring about the piece because their imagination is alert. So these are, this is a little section talking about materials. So most of the puppets that I make are made in exactly the same way as we were talking about before, using clay and papier-mâché. I also carve, so a lot of them are wooden. I'm really interested in found object as well, so just playing with different materials and combinations of materials, but tending always to be natural materials. And then some of the masks and puppet characters have become sort of more giant puppets. So these soldier puppets were a part of a performance that I made a few years ago. And some of those puppets, just like the puppets made for May Day, are for outdoor kind of events for a larger audience. And this is a piece that was made in a lake in Switzerland, in Austria, a couple of years ago. And more giant puppets, this again using other natural materials. So yeah, this is a little section about process. So quite often I'll begin with a clay sculpt, and it's sort of like just solid clay over a can or some kind of a solid form that's then covered with layers of just simple brown paper, papier-mâché. And some of my puppets are made out of wood. This is the picture that you shared, actually, Felice, earlier. So they're carved usually out of lime wood, which is a local European wood. And this was part of a performance that toured to nursing homes in the UK. And yep, for me, carving is also a fantastic part of the process of discovering the essence of a character, the kind of almost like the essence or the soul of a character that you want to portray, sort of leaving enough information out that the audience can fill parts in for themselves, and putting just enough in that the sculpture is satisfying and draws the viewer in. And I really enjoyed working with wood so much that I thought, oh, it'd be really fun to make some giant pieces in wood. So a few years ago, I also made a cycle-powered carousel that's made out of wood, and it continues to tour around the UK as a kind of outdoor performance play piece for families with small children. It was actually devised as a way of encouraging conversations between parents and children about the natural world, and it coincided with reports coming out about how certain nature words were being taken out of the dictionary because of lack of use. And I thought, well, what can I mean, there's not much I can do about it, apart from if I give people a reason to talk about hedgehogs and hares and badgers, then maybe that will make a difference. So that's why the carousel came into being. Also, recently I've been increasingly making more lantern puppets as another form of expression, and a regular source of work has been making animals for our local zoo. And these are some that I made this winter with another artist, Johnny Quick. They're made out of they're the only things that I'll make out of a non-natural material. So, I mean, it's not a terrible material, but the faces are sculpted out of warbler rather than papier-mâché, just because it casts a really beautiful light. And these are, again, some touring pieces that I have that go out regularly, these swallow puppets. And and I have just a few slides here about teaching residencies that I've done in the last couple of years. Do I have a few more minutes, Felice?
Yes, you do. You do.
I think that means yes.
Yes, you do. I was slow on the draw.
Fantastic. So a few years ago, I went to Beijing and used the opportunity of being there to work with some students from a design school in Beijing to create masks. And it was really exciting to have them just create their own masks. The teaching is very different in different places, and I was really aware of how students in the UK are really encouraged to create their own work rather than to be taught work. And so I really pushed them to make their masks in whichever way they really wanted to. And they came up with some absolutely amazing characters, which were then performed. These are the masks that they then performed at the Puppet Festival in Beijing. And then last year I went to Iraq, and again, mask performance felt like a really wonderful way of communicating across cultural barriers. And we spent a lot of time playing with masks and then making masks. And then the group, who were all from Mosul in Iraq, where, you know, only just a few years ago ISIS had been you know, had taken the city over completely. They were really starting to try and encourage new art forms. So it was a really exciting thing to be part of that process. There you go. Let's see. And they made some head masks and they made some giant masks and worked together. And they really enjoyed improvising with the masks that I brought. I was unsure about, because all of the women wore hijab, I was unsure about how they would feel about wearing a full head mask, but they had absolutely no problem at all. They just put it on top of their hijab and performed that way. So it was kind of really liberating, actually. It was fantastic. And this was a picture from the performance that we made, which was called The Nest. And they actually toured this piece. It was devised in the Kurdish region in Sulaymaniyah, and then they toured it to several cities around Iraq, including performing it in Mosul, which was an incredibly proud moment for me. Well, that's the end of my slideshow.
Great. I mean, I guess maybe we talk so much about being efficient that everybody's ahead of the game. So this is great because there are so many wonderful questions in the Q&A. And we had also thought that it would be nice for you and Sandy if you had a response to each other's presentation or a question that you wanted to highlight first or draw out from the other person's practice. It would be great to hear those. And then we'll move on to audience questions.
Yes, I think one thing that I'd really like to bring up is obviously we are both here talking together and about our respective work that obviously has so many similarities. But the thing that you said at the very beginning, Felice, which is about this kind of, I can't remember what the term was that you used, but about this sort of family.
Like lineages.
Yeah, lineages
and relationships.
Exactly. And I think that's something that's really, it's so interesting, you know, seeing people from all over the world that draw on each other's inspiration and, but find new ways to, you know, new reasons for that in their own situation.
I did see someone either in the chat or the Q&A, and we are trying to get people to put questions in the Q&A, but I did see someone asking if Sandy would speak briefly about her lineage. Like, who did she take inspiration from? She's given to so many.
Well, I started by walking into a workshop that was happening in the basement of a local church called Walker Community Church in Minneapolis. And it was being offered by an organization called the Powderhorn Puppet Theater, which was very new. It was about 6 months old. And I came in and I made hand puppets, one of death and one of a beautiful green maiden. And that had actually been started by David O'Fallon, who did his doctoral dissertation in theater and community and had spent a little bit of time in San Francisco with the San Francisco Mime Troupe, but then also the Bread and Puppet Theater. So he was bringing the vision of big puppets to Minneapolis. And he did his final doctoral dissertation on the 4th of July in Powderhorn Park called A Boat, a Boot, a Book, a Ball of Yarn. Subsequently, he and someone named Ray St. Louis started the workshop in the basement of the church, and that's where I came. I grew deeper and deeper into that, and very shortly came the word that the Bread and Puppet Theater was going to close, and we had to go and see it. And so I crowded into a car with some other people, and we drove all the way out there, and it took my breath away. It was the very last circus that they did at Goddard College in southern Vermont, Plainfield. And I just knew, I mean, I was young, and it caught my breath. It caught my sense of sculpture and movement. And when I came back, I just started working, and I kept working and working. And then I did become the artistic director of In the Heart of the Beast Theater for 45 years, up until 2019 or 2020, right at that juncture, when all of the artists at the theater were laid off, and then COVID happened, and then the George Floyd murder happened right in our neighborhood. And so since that time, there's just been a lot of transitions. For a while, lots of the work was going a little bit underground, but now we see the most amazing blossoming of many of the different artists who had worked with In the Heart of the Beast Theater. And now in my backyard, I have many of the puppets that had been in the huge warehouse of the theater when they totally dispersed and shut down the warehouse. That's the nutshell story.
That's great. Maybe I'll move on to audience questions because there are so many, and they're really good questions. So, Alison, do you want to turn your camera back on, and I'll just ask to both of you, and some might be more for one person, some more for another, but one person asks, where do you find inspiration for your faces? Are they modeled by real people you know? And I don't know who it was for, but I think it could be for either person, really.
Well, I'll take that one, I guess. I think I am fascinated by people's faces, and I'm always aware if I go to London that obviously nobody looks at each other in London, but I sit on the tube and I can't stop looking at people because everybody's face is just absolutely amazing. You know, the relationship between different parts of the face, totally gorgeous, gorgeous. So I kind of obviously store all that stuff up in my mind, but sometimes when I'm making a mask, it's based on photographs of people. You know, it might be that, you know, especially if I'm making a mask from another culture, I'm really interested in understanding kind of the geography of different faces. So I do sometimes work from photographs, but very, very rarely do I make a portrait. Usually it's taking some inspiration from that, but then just working into the clay and trying to find the soul of that character. And I know that sounds like a weird term, but I think it's true. I think you know when you've found somebody in the clay, and that's what you then seek to bring out. That's how I love to work anyway. Sandy, what about you?
Well, I would answer in very, very, very much the same way, which is why I love clay so much and not so much cardboard at all. Unless I get paper and start squishing it, that's like starting to be a new clay. But I too study faces all the time, and but it is the moment with the clay, and then the abstraction that comes with the clay. And sometimes things will just fly out of my hands, you know, just fly. And other times it's like work and work and work, and no, I'm just not finding the right soul. Sometimes I'll just completely destroy it, even though it's completely done. Or that most amazing time period when you can see the mask and you lift it and you can look at it from its different angles, and you turn it down so you can see, does it have an expression in all the different ways that it moves? Yeah, but yeah, I do have some masks that are very like masks made of the grass, for instance, that are just very, very tall and slender, but people still wore as masks, still working them with those same kind of sensibilities of the movement that comes from your breath up into your into this part of your neck. And anyway, yeah, the clay. Thank you to the clay. Our good,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely, yeah. And just that moment that you hear it speaking, it's just like, oh yeah, there you go.
Oh my goodness, Alison and I made some pretty funny things when
We
she was here. We sometimes made these things that we would just laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh like they were so terrible.
Well,
Or we had to completely change them. And then we made this one thing that is so huge. It can't fit anywhere. It's not like these ones now made with clever armatures that make it a little bit lighter. And it's in a building not so far away, a green center, but I don't think it'll ever move out of there.
this morning when I was, I don't have any pictures on my computer, in the folders that you use of images of things that we've made together, because I guess that's from a different time when photos were real. So
before the digital world.
I opened the suitcase that's like layers and layers of pictures of children and, people I don't know anymore. And sure enough, I found this, few little pictures of the year that we made the listening things, and remembered us just really giggling about those. And then the really beautiful, the one that you're talking about that wove in and out. Yeah. And then of the year that we, at the beginning of the parade, did the fantastic crickets. That was so hilarious. So it brought back some lovely memories.
We have quite a few questions about your process. Both of you, there's one that's just in general about the process of making masks, and then there are some specific ones about the rattan and bamboo for the giant bodies. So maybe we'll start with the just general process, but know that there's a few other questions that are more specific too.
Sandy, do you want to go ahead? Or
well, for me, the process really starts with what is it? And I actually love working with a small team of people to, like I said, listen in to the pulse of what something is. And we go through a time of improvising. How is something going to move? And we have cardboard boxes and sticks and pieces of fabric that people wear, and they perform something just with these very, very abstracted forms. And then being able to see the gesture of the movement happen, from there comes, for me anyway, the idea of what it can be and what it will look like, and then the actual sculpting of it. So, I mean, you should talk about the frames and the wonderful withies that exist in England, and you can't really get them here in the United States.
I think you can.
Well, you can, but they're very, very, very expensive.
Yeah, so just the making process of masks, still exactly the same that Sandy has done for ages and that I learned with her, starting with clay, then a layer. I tend to use saran wrap cling film as a in-between layer, but it can be anything that's a barrier layer to stop the moisture of the clay coming through into the paper, and then covering it with layers of strong brown paper or newspaper or whatever paper that you have, and wallpaper paste, cornstarch, whatever you tend to use. Yeah, that's, and then cutting it off, joining it back together, just very simple, cheap, basic materials. And of course, the joy of that way of working is the clay can be reused over and over and over. And I often think contains all of the faces that you've made before. And that's the thing that's gorgeous about it, is knowing all the things that have been made in that same thing.
And also, if you use newspaper, that it contains all of the stories of the day that you're transforming into this being that will then speak in a different way. And the joy of paper mache, of sitting around a table and learning each other, telling stories and gossiping. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hours and hours and hours and hours of paper mache. Okay, you keep going.
Yeah,
Well,
no, I was going to just say yes, Sandy. I think it's like that thing of community art making, of being around one thing and papering together. You know, it's true everywhere. People just really relax into the moment and really enjoy each other's company. And it's such an amazing, powerful thing to do.
Alison, there's a couple that are specifically about the lantern puppets, and I think related to that, the rattan or bamboo and how to attach those. So the really nitty gritty of those forms.
I would say it's a little hard to talk about the nitty gritty in this kind of forum, but those lantern masks in particular are made out of a material called warbler, which is a thermoplastic that you buy in sheets and you use a heat gun, you melt it. I use it in the same way I use papier-mâché. I only use that for making lantern heads because A, it's expensive, B, it's not paper, you know, and I love paper more than anything else. So yeah, other than that, you can work with it in the same way. Withies are just sticks. I mean, they're just willow sticks. So any willow branches, you know, when they send out new growth, they send out these lovely spurs. Here, we're fortunate to be able to buy them with the bark off because they are processed for basket making. But you can use split bamboo in the same way. Actually, for you can use all kinds of things like the tubing that's for brewery. You know, when you're brewing, you can use that kind of plastic tubing. Anything that's pliable, that can be joined and make a structure that's hollow inside but can have a translucent material on the outside, whether that's wet strength tissue paper, which is often used, or actually those lantern puppets that I showed just had ripstop nylon kind of coats because it's translucent and it really diffuses the light, and so it's really lightweight and it's waterproof, which is, I live in England and they have to be out for days and days and days, so they have to be waterproof. So but yeah, I put a little process video on my Instagram page the other day, so if anybody looks at that, there is a making video of the snow leopards that I shared a picture of.
Okay, and we can share that on the post Zoomie mailing that we put out. We'll find that work, the tutorial that we put on.
Again, if anybody has specific questions afterwards, I'm really happy for people to get in touch with me.
I also want to say that what you didn't see here is that Alison has made many gorgeous films. And I'm just saying.
Oh. Well, we can definitely include links to those as well.
I made some very goofy animations during lockdown because it was a way of like telling stories when it's just you and the things that you have on your table and you can't play with other people. So you can still find that kind of flow state, that lovely, you know, thing that you find when you're playing, but with tiny bits of paper on a light box.
And Alison, you had said that you carve with lime wood, which is, I think, linden, and also I think we call it basswood here. I'm pretty sure it's all the same.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And someone wanted to know if there were any other woods that you use or if that's generally the wood you carve.
That's what I tend to carve. A lot of people use a wood called gelatong, which is a beautiful wood to carve. It's really like carving butter, but it's an Indonesian wood, and it's although I think there are some sustainable sources of it, it's an endangered wood, and so I prefer to avoid it. But I do understand, you know, that it's really nice to carve. So mostly I use lime, which is linden, yeah, and I think it's pretty much the same as basswood. We can get it grows here in the UK, and I can get it from a tree surgeon. So it's trees that would have been cut down anyway, rather than trees that are cut down specifically to be turned into puppets, which doesn't feel right. That's a bit of wood. Yeah, it has really nice straight grain, so you can really yeah, you can carve it really nicely, and it doesn't break that easily.
Oh, great. Someone asks both of you to speak about using masks to work across cultural barriers and in community.
Sandy, you go for that one.
Well, an obvious thing about masks is that they speak without words. And so often you can create a narrative just with movement or movement with music. Or if you do have any kind of a narration, it can happen from the side and the mask work is happening, in which case that if you happen to take it in a different place and the need for a different language, then that narrator can change. Working in community is, it's infectious. I mean, really, I think the thing is just to start. The work itself just draws people together. When we had the Avalon Theater on Lake Street, which is a very major artery in Minneapolis, we would often pour out of the building onto the sidewalk. And pretty soon, anyone who walks by starts talking, and pretty soon the next day they're there, especially at May Day time, where hundreds and then thousands of participants would come. And people enter from wherever they are. Some people who have never done any kind of art at all, and also people who have had extensive amounts of art come and then sometimes relearn how to unlearn things that they've learned to enter into the kind of community work or the very simple methods that of working with clay and paper. Yeah, Alison. But I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
The deep thinking, the wrestling, the not being afraid to think that you can actually create the worlds that you wish to see in theater form, in puppet form. And if you can step into that world, can we then step into it in our real life?
Mm-hmm.
Not be afraid.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I did the project in Iraq last year, one of the things that was so incredible was the listening to the things that people had experienced, and then just that collective, you know, imagining what kind of world do we want to, what kind of a world we want to create in our puppet place that allows people to imagine what can happen beyond there. And we created there a performance without words because we were working in a region that spoke Kurdish, participants who spoke Arabic, I speak English, and it was funded by a German organization, so it was many languages already, and some of the participants were Yazidi, so they have their own language. And so it felt important that the piece was completely wordless, because then it was completely open to everybody to understand in the same way, because so many things are different when they're translated. But it does make, you know, what's really exciting is I've seen some of the participants who were a part of that piece, in which we kind of, it was a very, very simple, lovely story about neighbors who had differences coming together to plant a space that a bird could make a nest, because so much of the environment was devastated during the ISIS years. And now some of those participants are part of tree planting programs in Shingal, where the Yazidi people are based. And it's amazing. You can change the world that way. Unfortunately, it feels sometimes unchangeable, but yeah, if you can't change people's hearts.
I think that said also in working cross-culturally is that I just think being incredibly humble is incredibly important, because there are certain images that you might think everybody knows or would resonate with, which actually someone else doesn't at all. And so when I say don't be afraid, I also want to say listen deeply and carefully, and keep love leading the process.
Maybe adding on to that, someone asked if you could speak a bit about the challenges and importance of tackling politically charged content in the remaining 4 minutes.
If anyone can do that, Sandy can.
I think that what, for me, it's finding the image and the way in that is not at all what the newspaper would do, or what normal dialogue would do, or what the media would do, but rather it's trying to find the place of connection or commonality, or that which is so essential. I think, honestly, one of the reasons I love working for the water so much is because it crosses boundaries so deeply, even though it can become a political hot point, because everybody is thirsty, everybody, and every bit of life depends on that water. So if you even just start from the very most basic way that people understand something, then, go from there. Like Alison just described a most beautiful scene of making a place where a bird can come, and that inspired tree planting. I mean, I think, yeah, there's so many ways, but it's not always easy to find the way.
Let's see, maybe there's time for one more short one. Unfortunately, there's so many wonderful questions, and so many people mentioning, just the kind of the wisdom and the sort of generosity of spirit and sort of the elevation of spirit, I think, that both of you embody, and that's very lovely. There's many questions about methods. People are really interested in just the relational aspect of your works. But I think just because we're about out of time, I'm going to ask one very simple question, which is, are you using clay or clay, like as in earthen clay, or are you using plasticine? This one should be quick.
Always clay from the earth. Always.
Okay.
Never plasticine. No.
All right, and that same person is telling you to please digitize those old photos, because we want to carry those things forward. All right. Well, unfortunately, as I'd mentioned earlier, we're on a little bit of a tight time frame tonight, so we have to end. And we'll try to share the questions and share the chat with Sandy and with Alison. We will try to kind of comb through and see if there's things that we can reply to in an email to everyone who's joined. This is recorded, and it will be on both the Women in Masks website under I think it's still under upcoming events. It'll probably be under upcoming events for a week or two, and then it'll be past events. But anyway, so please look there. Email if you can't find it. And also on the UNIMA-USA YouTube channel, which you all are probably familiar with. And whoops, well, turn off my alarm. And I just wanted to mention to everybody, please do consider joining UNIMA-USA. There's a little Valentine's Day special going on right now. It's a real bargain. And, it's just so important if you want to see support for puppets and masks and all such things in the United States. And the way that UNIMA, which is related to UNIMA International, really connects us to, globally to the whole world. So please consider joining. Thank you to everyone. Thank you so much, Sandy. Thank you so much, Alison. This has been, if we could bring maybe them back on very quickly, if you can turn your camera on, I would just like to give you a round of applause, and I'm sure the 60 some attendees are also applauding, whether you can hear it or not. Oh, I see their floating applause going up through the ether.
And thank you, Felice, and the bigger team around this Zoom. Thank you for all the technical support and everything.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. We live for this. All right, everyone. Have
Wonderful.
have a wonderful night.
Bye-bye. Good night.